Hello and welcome to Royale Without Cheese, our bi-weekly podcast in which we discuss both the classic and the unknown of art and popular cinema from the then and now. We are your hosts, me, Tomás Ferreira, Leonardo Miranda.
Hello.
And Miguel Aido.
Hi there.
Today we talk about Seconds by John Frankenheimer with today's special guest, the podcast Cows in the Field, hosted by Justin Koo, professor of philosophy at MIT, and Laura Koo, art historian turned fundraiser. Their podcast is dedicated to exploring the philosophical, aesthetic, and cultural themes in popular movies, inspired by Werner Herzog's exhortation.
And we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in the field.
As always, before any dues, don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, or simply give us a like. Seconds is a 1966 sci-fi psychological horror directed by John Frankenheimer and starring Rock Hudson as a middle-aged New York banker who, disillusioned with his life, contacts an agency specializing in providing new identities through plastic surgery. At the time, Seconds entered the 1966 Cannes Film Festival, later getting nominated for its cinematography for an Academy Award and considered one of Frankenheimer's greatest works. However, did RWC and Cows in the Field fancy this Kafkaesque visage of American suburbia? Well, let's dive in, shall we?
Laura, do you have thoughts on this?
I loved it. Did you like it, Justin?
Yes, I liked it. Yeah.
I had so much fun. I didn't know what to expect whatsoever. But I love a paranoid thriller. So I was hooked in, even though I was very tired, I'm often tired.
Laura was exhausted, but it's a standard. That's not a critique of the film. I loved it. I thought I had not seen it before, and Frankenheimer is a bit of a blind spot for me. I was looking at his filmography afterwards, and I was like, oh my God, he did that, and so on. And making films through Ronin, I just could not.
Oh, really?
I had not put this all together. Anyway, it was wonderful to watch the film, and in particular, I think one of the things we should definitely talk about is sort of the relationship, sort of this film's relationship in the history of the United States, and in particular in post-war Reconstruction in America, and like the relationship between the 60s of that and the 1950s. And I mean, I enjoyed the film a lot when I watched it, but I enjoyed it even more reflecting on it once I had seen the entire sort of arc of the character of Arthur Hamilton / Tony Wilson. So yeah,
you're like, I'm totally signing up. I'm going to be a reader.
Yeah.
And then like deeper, and you're like, maybe this isn't a good idea.
Yeah, that's right. I was like, oh man, I'm having second thoughts about this shadowy company that will change my life completely.
The first third Justin's like, bye, see you never. I'm getting a new face.
What did you guys think? Had you guys seen the film before?
No.
We
picked this one because for a long time we've been talking about this film, and we were like, okay, it sounds like something that they would like too, so it made sense. And Frankenheimer also a blind spot for me, not really someone I knew much about. Of course, I knew about the Manchurian Candidate and that general concept about the activation code, saying a word and a sleeper cell wakes up, and all that in mind. And then I watched that film as well, just to get familiar with him a little more. But Seconds really blew me away. Just, I mean, purely on a stylistic level, just the images, it's amazing. I mean, the beginning, like right at the credits, so haunting. And so even if you're like, oh, maybe I would like to get this operation, I mean, the film stylistic is already pointing to the fact that maybe it's not a good idea, which I think is pretty good.
Yeah. That's
Saul Bass is like, I'm already going to give you a hint.
I mean, for me too, Frankenheimer was kind of a blind spot, but I've known him for a long while. I remember as a kid always passing by Ronin with Robert De Niro on TV, and I was like, I need to watch this movie. Second time around, third time around, I never get a chance to watch Ronin, and Ronin is always passing me by. And of course, the Manchurian Candidate. But this one was extremely, it's so modern. That's the word I have for it. The worries in the film, its concerns still live on today. I think in wanting to, for me, the biggest question in the film, if not one of the biggest questions, is really this: how do you answer the search for happiness? We kind of go on through life as we are checking boxes on a grocery list. Okay, you have a career, so are you married? And all that stuff. But then, when someone asks, "Are you happy?" we're kind of like, "No," or "I don't know." It's tough, and more often than not, you have people who after checking those boxes, and this is how we find the protagonist. You are married, you have wife, you have a home, you have a good steady job, executive. So are you happy? And it's kind of this very surreal situation where Frankenheimer puts us in. Yeah, and it's all to do with these features of the human mind that lead us to fall into the trappings of intuitions and comparing ourselves to other people and ultimately wanting different lives. But it all happens in here. That's what doesn't change for the protagonist. And I think he found a beautiful way to express that through visual means in the film. The very first thing in the opening scene, just to kind of talk a little bit about that, is his choice to use this kind of fisheye lens, 9.7 millimeter, incredibly like open, wide. In a mix of insert shots and close-ups, they really distort the reality of this man, which is distorted itself by what society kind of imprints on him to follow, to believe that that's where happiness lies. And it's always in this combination with his face being almost on the edge of the frame, cut off, and you have this it produces this sense of an out-of-body experience, because in essence, normally in movies, especially in the 50s and 40s, you had these sweeping tracking shots beautifully laid out for you, where you kind of follow the character in his world or her world. And in this case, the camera is fixed, fixed position. And it's not the movement of the camera that is being imprinted on the world of the actor, but in this case, it's the movement of the actor as he walks in this space, this grand station, that is imprinted on this fixed camera position, who I feel is like a body cam, which I've never seen a body cam in the 60s. It's quite surreal. So in essence, you have this sense of movement, but you're not really moving. It's the actor that's transporting you. And when he goes on the train, it carries on this theme of movement while being still, and Frankenheimer really has this kind of inclination to use illusions of movement. There's a name for it. It's called illusions of self-motion. When you are inside a train and another train passes, yours is actually still, but because the other one is moving, you create this feeling that you are in motion. The reverse happens, where the train is moving, you see the trees is like a still object, but because of the movement of the train, it's like doom, 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 and he is really transfixed by that idea, I feel, by the whole choice with the body cam, and then cutting in between different frames of the window makes you see out into the world, and the world passes by, but you are still in this kind of encapsulated cocoon that is this body. And I just feel like I'm watching something out of a prehistoric Cronenberg, so to speak, in a weird way. It is the silence of this man, his presence expressed in such a weird way that I've never seen. It's this to say that it's very difficult to kind of express in visual terms interior monologue, what is the character going through. And I think he found a very beautiful way of doing it in this film through those choices of that fisheye lens, that edge of frame, disposition, and that illusion of self-motion. The world is going by, but you are still.
Yeah. I like that idea, because it speaks to one of the broad themes of the film, which is that this guy is stuck. He's achieved everything that he's been told he should achieve. He has a nice house, he has a wife, he has a kid, he's financially secure. But as a result of that, he's stuck, he's stationary, and he sees life as just passing him by. So he has that. Importantly, I like the way you put it in terms of the illusion of movement. All of that achievement is, in some ways, to him at least, an illusion. It's not real. It's something that, it's like an illusion or a facsimile of happiness. Of course, that facsimile of happiness was the one that was sort of given to returning veterans in 45, and that was built up in the 1950s of this, like, the white picket fence ideal of like having a middle-class suburban home and commuting via the train to the city to do your work and stuff. But it becomes this cyclical thing where you feel like, well, I'm just treading water here, but I'm not going anywhere. I'm not, where is this headed? What am I, what's the outcome of all of this? And that is characteristic, I think, of the midlife crisis. At least my colleague, Kieran Sedia, who's written extensively on the philosophy of the midlife crisis, he argues that that's like the defining characteristic of it, which is the feeling of repetition without end. Clearly, this guy's going through some kind of midlife crisis. Well, he's a bit older than we typically associate with so the midlife crisis is supposed to be happening to me. I'm 40. I'm supposed to be like, I am having a midlife crisis. So I think it is like
a little bit.
This guy, I feel he's 50, I think, right? the character of Arthur. He's a grown child who is out of the house.
But I think having a grown child is
That's another point.
That's the important time, I think, to have a midlife crisis, because the kids sometimes can be a distraction. They keep you busy. You feel needed. And then once they're out of the house, you're like, okay, what has he got left? He expects to be president of the bank one day. That's like one more thing to strive for.
More money,
more commuting, more denying loans, right? Like he's just, but with a fancier title. That's the only thing he sort of got left. Like when the old man is like, what do you have going on? He's like, well, I might be president of the bank one day.
God, I gotta think it.
But I think he's right on time for a midlife crisis. You might be a tad early, honey.
Maybe I'm early. Question for you guys about this very point. You're all a bit younger than me, I would guess. Also, you guys, it is 2024 and not 1966. Does this theme resonate today in the same way that it did perhaps in 66, or it might have in 1996?
I mean, what I felt was that it was completely modern. I know, and just this pursuit of trying to alter your face. I mean, plastic surgery is still a big thing today. So if not more advanced than ever, and people are always, I think it's the beautiful thing about cinema, I think, is that, you see movies from the 60s or even the 20s or the 10s or the 40s, and you can find concerns and frailties to do with the human condition that traverse. It's so surprising how they come back to you, and wow, people are really concerned with this today still, and social media in a way is kind of a reassessment of that whole problem with people putting filters and constructing, personas of themselves that are really not actually truth, and the whole deal with celebrity as well. It's another kind of plastic surgery with the kind of people that you circle around yourself, publicists and whatnot, to create a version of yourself that isn't true or not. I don't know. It's so people are always in need to create this other version that they might make them feel more comfortable with themselves, and this is more popular, people are gonna like me, I like that. And it's weird, the things that we are looking, I think what the film argues is that we're always looking for tangible, concrete, physical things. In the case of Tony Wilson / Hartsfield Hamilton, certificates of study that somehow are going to prove that without any labor or work whatsoever, you are a painter now, you are accepted. I think that's one of the greatest lines in the film. And it goes completely the other way. And I think it has, it's another layer in the film, where the film to me also talks about not only that aspect of self-image and wanting to alter your self-image to make you feel somehow happy, and I'm going to be attractive now, but also the trappings of capitalism in a way, and self-pursuit of trying to get things, whether it's money, the house in Malibu, the girlfriend or the boyfriend, or, these things that have no value, are soon to be empty. And I think that's what he's missing, and he's hoping that other people, whether society or the company, give him meaning through these things, these objects, when it's actually, but he's always alone. If you see in the frame, Rock Hudson is always alone, looking at the beach, at the emptiness of the ocean. And I think you have no one, man. I think where he really feels as close possible to happiness, even in the film, is a trick, because it's when he is at that hippie festival, and that's pleasure. And that's one of the problems, is that we seem to misplace happiness for pleasure, and that's not durable at all. In the moment he surrenders to it, and it's fun, and it's like laughing is contagious. You are there, and it's great how he films. I think it's one of the first moments in the film where there's an actual capture of a moment in handheld. So it's very brutal, it's very sensorial. You feel the wine, you feel the people together, the laugh very close to you, the low angle kind of detail of the close-ups. But after that soon goes over, he's kind of inebriated. But when he becomes sober again, that kind of fantasy washes all away.
It's interesting that you see these sort of hints. Like, for example, you mentioned, Tomás, the painting certificates, and even at those moments, he kind of questions, if that has some validity or how easy it would be. So it's interesting to see that even to him, there's like a hint at too much facility, and that not everything should be as easy as that. And I think that's interesting, because it kind of shows that what he's looking for is something else. I'm not sure he can quite define it, but yeah, it's some sort of meaning and choice that he kind of starts to speak about it at the end of the film. But during the film, kind of is just abstractly contemplating, perhaps thinking that there may be something else, but not entirely sure what it is. And I think that like a definition in his life really kind of cements who this character is.
Yeah, I think it's useful to compare the Bacchanal, the thing, the '60s hippie party, with the immediate scene coming after it, which is the party, the drunken party at his house, the whatever it is, the cocktail party. Yeah.
Yeah.
So because he's I mean, there's alcohol in both, and he's very, very drunk in the latter scene. And I don't know if he's drunk or not or whatever. They're also high in the '60s, the counterculture, scene. But I think what's interesting about the difference between those scenes is, both involve a kind of pleasure, like the pleasure of inebriation, the pleasure of being caught up in the moment and doing something. But it's interesting, in the Bacchanal, everybody's getting naked. So they're like exposing themselves, and then they're doing this communal activity of crushing the grapes. So they're like joining together in some ways, and they're getting caught up in that. Whereas in the cocktail party, they're fracturing apart. He's being pulled away from his girlfriend or whatever, and going over here, and he's being forced to be introduced to all these people and kind of live this fakeness that of this life that he has. Whereas in the Bacchanal, nobody knows who he is and nobody cares. So there is no like fakery. He could just kind of like be a human being. So I actually kind of read the contrast between those scenes, and the happiness that he shows when he finally lets go in the Bacchanal is genuine. And it's, I think, maybe potentially actually genuine happiness, in the sense that he's forming a bond with another human being.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
and that could be the key to him finding genuine happiness, is having a real bond. And that's the other thing that he lacks with his wife. He goes and visits his wife in the form of Tony, and wants to know about how, tell me a little bit about your late husband, because I think he's trying to see if maybe he was missing something that she picked up on. And there wasn't anything there. Like she didn't really have any connection with him. They weren't bonded in any real way. They lived like, what was it, like what was it, celibate or whatever, coexistence or whatever she calls it. And so it's maybe the movie is suggesting that like true happiness is not going to come via the procurement of status or your looks or whatever, or money, but through connections that we form with other people.
I think that's definitely, that's why he's so devastated when he finds out Nora is in fact an employee, because I think he thought that he had a genuine, authentic connection with her. But the other thing, speaking of Nora, that's tough at that party, is that she chastises him for drinking too much, and she's like, "It's not you." Which, like, who is him? Like, he doesn't, who is him? What a sentence. But like, he hasn't figured that out yet. And she's immediately like, I am going to tell you who you should be and how you should act in a particular situation. Yes, it was fine that we were, naked in grapes yesterday, but now we're at a cocktail party, and I will tell you who you are, and you are not somebody who drinks too much at a cocktail party. And he feels like newly formed. He wants to be reborn. He wants to be newly formed, and he wants to like find that space to figure out who he is alongside somebody he thinks he has a genuine connection with. And it turns out neither one of those things are really on offer for him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting because it also reflects kind of I think one of the themes as well, which is kind of the lack of courage to really make changes in your life. I mean, it's kind of sad to think that they don't fight, even though it seems paradoxical. But I mean, it's kind of strange that after all these years they have such a monotonous life and they can just get along. And that's just the word that he uses, get along. It's not something else that speaks to some more excitement. So, I mean, yeah, the fact that at the end he starts to see that he has to put some action in his life really speaks to how he had been, I wouldn't say weak, but just too comfortable and too
complacent.
He's closed off.
Yeah,
I think we see her reach out a bunch in the first scenes with her. She's checking in. She's noticing that he's upset about the phone calls. She goes to him in his single bed when he has like the ulcer or whatever, and kisses him, and like tries to linger for a while. And he's like, all right, I'm going to sleep. Like, she's, even 20, 30 years later, however long they've been married, she can tell he's unhappy, and she's trying to reach out, but he just will not reach back, even though he wants a genuine connection. And that may also be something that a lot of men in post World War II, we're dealing with whatever, they weren't really allowed to like show their emotions for what they went through. They were just supposed to be the strong provider. Even when a hand is being offered to them, they don't feel like they can reach back.
Yeah.
I think the contrast between those two scenes the fact that they come so close one after the other is very, very intentional. It works really well because it's in both scenes he's in some way giving into some sort of primal urge. Something like in one he's naked and stomping on grapes, and you can interpret what he's feeling as either happiness that is genuine or a fleeting happiness that maybe is artificial. It's like illusory. Whereas in the other scene is him again giving into an urge of getting drunk, and as he does that, he starts flowing back into his other self, which I think is very suggestive of something. I think it's like he's never satisfied. Now he's in this other life and he's missing the old life, and he goes back to his wife to try to see what he was missing in that old life too. So I think the film is a little depressing in that sense, that it feels like he's completely lost. He doesn't know what happiness is. He doesn't know if he's ever even experienced it.
I think the film is super depressing. I think here's an even more depressing reading of the Bacchanal. So you might think the Bacchanal is just okay. So you could read both scenes as basically like you're being forced by the society of which you're a part of to join in with this group. You're actually losing your agency or your individuality and your autonomy by being forced to be agglomerated into a group which is all doing the same thing. And so either that could be working at the bank, it could be at the cocktail party, just like pleasantries, shaking hands, we all kind of drink martinis and wear the same suits, or it could be we all get naked and stomp grapes together. And now and do you want to stomp grapes? No, too bad. You're stomping grapes. We're all joining in and we're doing this. And so you might think like what's being offered to him are all of these like, well, try this, try that, try that. Those are being imposed from without. And what would provide him genuine happiness is actually to like make a choice that stems or flows from who he is as an individual. But he's not afforded that opportunity. We don't have to necessarily like point fingers and say, oh, these systems that are imposing standards that scripts and things you might follow to find happiness are doing so nefariously. In fact, I think actually the company, through the guise of the old man who is maybe the owner of the company or the founder, who knows what he is really? He could just be a mouthpiece. But he says, he started it with good intentions. Like he wanted to help people like Arthur who were struggling with the crisis of meaning. But the way he thought he could do it is by like creating himself a new identity for the person. But it just turns out that like even that isn't a success, like because true autonomy and individuality has to flow sort of separate from the external coming in. It has to be sort of from you. And so then the movie is just like, yeah, so in fact, don't go looking for all these external things to provide you meaning, but also what else is there? I mean, pure choice. It's like the film could on that interpretation be rather bleak in that like you're just like, well, you're not going to have meaning, and a lot of people are going to try to provide you it, but it's all going to fail. And so
not
good
just
luck.
meaning, culpability as well. Don't try to waste a lot of time blaming or trying to see where the blame is. Just focus on yourself. I think it's also
what you've been saying. I think to me it touches a lot on this idea that there's this trapping of being a human being where you want your choices made for you by someone else. It's easy. And, it really speaks to this thing of let yourself free of any strenuous activity of thought, of choice is better when given out to machines or other people to do it for you. And that's what happens in that session with the specialist that feels the need to drug him. So to carve out of him, what are your desires and wishes? You can't even tell it yourself. And I feel that that's the situation for a lot of people, when posed the question, are you happy? What would make you happy? I'm like, what have I done? No, what could I do? It's like a blank face. I don't know. Like
it all started with a red ball.
One of the things you said earlier, Tomás, which is that there's no effort or work being put in by the character of Arthur to realize his happiness. And instead, he's taking this easy path provided for him by a company, which is going to provide him paintings to the point where this dude is actually a painter. Like he knows how to paint. Mm-hmm. It was his hobby. So, but instead of like,
and that was
like,
his mode of creative expression.
yeah, instead of being like, okay, great, now you're going to get to just have some time to paint and become and find your own, you know, artistic style.
Voice,
No,
yeah.
it's like, we will provide you paintings so you can pretend to be a real painter. It's like so inauthentic. And I was just thinking about like how much of a fraud he must feel like when he's, you know, when he's going to the canvas and he's kind of making these lines, but they're not really corresponding to the paintings he's supposed to be taking credit for because he didn't paint those paintings. And like, just that would feel horrible. Like, just to, you know, if it's like he's in the Truman Show, but he knows he's in the Truman Show and he just has to carry it
Oh
out.
yeah, that's good. Yeah, yeah, definitely. And ironically, it just makes me think. Then again, you know, we're making the modern comparison of AI and the paintings and images that people conjure up with AI having some sort of a feeling of authorship when it's just, you know, pieces pulled together from other sources. And yeah, it's a lot to do, you know, this thing with happiness and how to achieve it. It's a lot to do with people. I think, having read some about it and psychologists discussing it, it's a lot to do with people wanting to amputate the idea that, oh, happiness exists without the hardships, but happiness has meaning when you include the hardships and what you do with them. It's what you do with those activities. If you amputate yourself from the effort, the labor of learning how to paint, even if there's failure, in the end, painting whatever it is, it doesn't have meaning if you're just, you know, you haven't studied, you haven't prepared, you haven't gone through that strenuous work. So yeah, I think that's a lot of what the movie kind of goes about, and I think it's incredibly modern. Still today, people, you know, struggle with those things. And even determinism, at that, you know, philosophical level, I feel a lot of that. You know, what, you know, is there free will? Is there choice? Or is every other action that you took in your life, either has the banker that he was or the painter that he became, a causality of what came before? Because it gets imprinted on you. You know, oh, you should do this, you should do that, because that's how you're going to achieve happiness. Finally, in the end, he decides for himself that I want to make just a choice of myself. And yeah, I mean, there's plenty to talk about in terms of other production design and whatnot.
It's quite twisted, the whole bit with the painting, because they hint that it's something that he has genuine interest in, because he himself says this. But then, because of the fact that in the adjustment period they provide him the pictures, it's like they're twisting his mind into thinking that even that is something that isn't from within. And so, yeah, I mean, he must be completely out of his depth and just confused, because what does he even enjoy? And so, yeah, it's interesting to see how even something that appeared to be genuine can be twisted into something that isn't.
Yeah. And on the question of determinism and free will, so I mean, this film is not like fully engaged at like, you know, in the actual philosophical conversation on this. That's perfectly fine. But there is a really, really cool point which it does engage. I mean, it sort of is suggestive of the idea that like being free and the action of being free is requires like a kind of radical break from the existing structures in which we're embedded. And so the example is, well, there are many, but one really prominent example is when he goes to the company for the first time and they're like, they explain what it is and, you know, how much it costs and everything. And then they're like, it's your choice. It's your choice, just sign or not. But then they're like, actually, but hold on, we blackmailed you.
Yeah.
And, you know, so just so you know, there's this film footage of you sexually assaulting a woman, well drugged.
Yeah.
So, but still, you know, but
You can walk away at any
you can
point.
walk away anytime.
No
You know,
pressure.
and so, and it is interesting. And you know, the other dimension of it, I think, is that so okay. First of all, just to finish that thought, is he really free when he makes that? It feels like a very coerced decision.
He also never came to that company in the first place. He was referred by somebody else who's also trapped, and he got ensnared and then blackmailed. Like,
Yes,
at no point was he like, I would like to start over again.
Well, so this is what I was not actually sure about.
Okay.
I think he knew a bit more about the company and what's going to happen and all that before he gets there. I think he had some conversations and had been, I don't think it's like, I don't know. That's my read, is that he wasn't getting it for the first time. But you're right, though, that like they are deceiving him throughout. And so then there's a question of like, how free are these choices when they're made either under coercion or under deception? That is interesting, too, because you could think, okay, the company is an allegory for society writ large. He didn't choose to live in post-war America where the social script was get married at 19, have a kid or two kids, be a banker and all that. He just was born into that, and he's living out this life there's a lot of abrasion and friction between him and that script. But what would it take for him to, so that is a kind of coercion, but what would it take for him to break with that? It would require a kind of radical sort of reimagining. And in that sense, you could say, I mean, I thought the idea of like the only way to break out of the system is radical reimagining of an alternative or something like that. That is Marxist in its core. That's like a Marxist idea. And this, of course, this film is like, in 1966, I don't know how explicit you could be about that kind of thing, but it's there in part because, Marx's writings are present in various forms beyond just like the workers' revolution. It's like the idea that like, we're blinded by the ideology of the system around us so that we can't even see it. And then to be awakened to that is, requires this sort of leap in a way. Anyway, I think the film is engaged with all of these fascinating ideas.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even the way he films the conversation with that old man as they are coercing him is very suggestive of that, the coercion and the deception. He's like literally a devil on the shoulder as he's talking to him. And then he moves around, goes to the other shoulder. It's very, I think visually speaking, it immediately communicates that as well. I think it's brilliant.
And his first
appearance...
appearance...
about the cricket in Pinocchio, weirdly.
Yeah,
his first appearance is he's we don't know he's there behind him.
I know, it's such a funny
and
little...
the camera pans over and you're like, whoa, where the fuck that guy come from? I think it's to speaking to that point. I love that.
Yeah. You guys have been talking about that, which is the relationship of this film to the post-war society and the Eisenhower administration specifically. Because it reminds me of a film that I watched, which is from Nicholas Ray, called Bigger Than Life, which is during the 50s, during specifically the Eisenhower times. It's about this man who lives a perfect, happy life. He's just like Arthur Hamilton, and he becomes addicted to a drug. I don't know exactly. I don't know if it's. I think it's some drug that makes him like super aggressive and boosts his ego through, like he becomes a megalomania, something like that. And it's a very destructive film, and it's a film that has a happy end, but it's the bleakest happy end I've ever seen in my life. The way he goes back to his family after absolutely tormenting them. And so this film sort of reminded me of a continuation of that film in exploring how unfulfilled these people are with this reality that is forced upon them, that they have to have this family, have this house, have this job, and their interiority gets sort of repressed by these superficial ambitions. I think you guys probably have a better understanding of what like America in the 50s was, in the 60s, as a response to that and all that. I don't know if
I mean, filtered through media.
That's truly, it's just filtered through media, and I like this and other counterculture reactions and things. I mean, but here's another question I want to ask you guys about. So this is a paranoia thriller in the vein of Manchurian Candidate and so on, and I do think like the film, part of this, the power the film has in the filmmaking style is how it utilizes the different camera stuff and so on to like induce that sense of paranoia in the viewer, in particular, in that the viewer is like, in many cases, we're given POV shots from Arthur/Tony's perspective, where we've got a wide angle lens. I'm thinking in particular at the party, once all the guests have like shoved him down on the bed and they're all looking directly into camera. And it's just that is a horrifying image, because it's that feeling of being like pushed back, all these people looming over you. It reminds me actually of like Gilliam. Terry Gilliam uses that kind of shot a lot, wide angle, lots of people looming into the frame.
Terrence Malick as well, in a way.
Yeah, Malick. I think the magic of it, though, in this case, is that the idea that like, oh, you're just at this party, it's a bunch of normal people, right? And then no, actually, they're all plants. They're all here to like shepherd you into whatever next phase of your life is. This is all unreal. and then and it's going to be borne out visually in the form of like everybody just staring at you. We just watched,
you feel looked at but not
being
seen.
looked at. Inception does this too. Actually, we were just watching Inception in 70 millimeter, sort of a re-release.
Wow. Okay.
And in Inception, there's that
brag, Justin.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, what can I say? Front row. But in Inception, you know, there's that moment where they're in the second layer of the dream, and Cobb tells Fisher, he's like, "You're dreaming," and everybody in the bar. This is when like the bar is turning and moving because they're and they all turn and look. There's like a ding, and they all turn and look at him. And you get that is a totally paranoid, like, that is like, oh my God, it's so freaky. The idea that everybody around here is not real and they could all suddenly look at you. And anyway, I love that piece of imagery in the film.
It's even more horrific at the end when he's about to die. And you have that shot as well with the doctor, not the doctor, the priest saying like last rites or something. It's like, oh my God.
I was always kind of questioning myself, how are they going to deliver the final piece of information that he's going to die? I mean, and it was so inventive how to decide to do this in a weird, dark, comedic way with the priest. Oh yeah, you're going to die. Bye. It was so
cranial drill.
And to the very end, I was like, oh, he's gonna make it, right? He's gonna make it. No, he's not. You know, like tortured myself.
It's so good. It's
so good. Yeah.
It's always so fluid in terms of the emotions that the film is trying to depict, because right after that horror moment, you have the shots of him playing with his daughter in the beach, and it's so sad again. So yeah, it's an interesting moment of playing with the emotions of who this character is, and yeah, it's constantly doing that, I think.
The other aspect of the paranoia that I think is really well done. I mean, it keeps us in the dark about what the structure of the film is for a long time, and we only, when we get to the company, do we have a sense of like what is actually happening, what the plan is, and everything. But even before we really get that, remember, he falls asleep on the couch. He has this weird hallucinatory drug-induced sexual assault thing. Then he wakes up and he goes to that room on the other end of the hall where all these guys, I love this image, all these men are just sitting there typing or reading at desks as if they're in their office doing their shitty jobs, sitting there, and none of them will talk to him or say what's happening. They're all just like, oh, get away. You know, and it's so weird. You're like, what the fuck is happening?
Yeah. It's like a hellish daycare where they just leave the kid there playing around with something horrible.
That's a great way to describe it. Yeah.
There are some scenes which are so Kafkaesque in that sense that they're irritating, because you just scream at yourself, even if not verbally, just do something, act, react, scream. And they just become passive. And it gets to the point where you're irritated because they don't do something else.
That actually reminds me. So another thing was, so when he's going to the place, and I love this. So, you know, he's in his suit and he's like, oh yes, Mr. Wilson, or what's his name? Mr. Hamilton. And they make him go, you know, first of all to a laundromat, and then they make him go to a meatpacking thing.
Slaughterhouse.
But then they make him, you know, do all this stuff, like sit there, eat this and that. And he's still wearing his slaughterhouse thing. I love it. But I love, my favorite thing about this is he's doing these absurd things, but he's happy to just go along with the script because they address him as Mr. Hamilton. Oh, yes, here, Mr. Hamilton. Would you like a drink? Would you like? And he's just like, oh, yeah, sure. You know, like he just gets caught up in the flow of, this is like, I'm at the bank and this is how people treat me at the bank. They're like, oh yes, Mr. Hamilton, can I do this for you? Sure. Yeah. You know, even though it's insane, he doesn't know where he is, what's happening, but he's just like, I'll just go along with this because I'm a rich white guy and this is what I do.
And I recognize this script.
I recognize this as this is recognizable to me.
I mean, the guy asks him to go into a dark van that is like the slaughterhouse van. Like, that's insane. I wouldn't get in there.
He's being equated to meat.
He's like, yes, he's being made into meat. And I love that it's used cows. That's what it's called, a used cow. Wow. But it's also like he was willing to go in there because he's like, well, customers typically ride in the back. He's like, well, I guess okay, I'm a customer.
Yeah, that's why I must do that, and not my role.
I'm like, okay, then if it was this easy, man, somebody should just abduct this guy and like hold him for ransom or something.
I know. They called him Mr. Hamilton.
Mr. Let me can I get you a coffee?
As I put a blindfold on you.
Yeah.
And put you in a small room. Yeah.
Definitely. The bandit afterwards is like literally the meme. Well, that was easy.
Yeah.
Carry on. Yeah. And to that effect, there's this beautiful scene in the office where this kind of second right-hand man to the old man, who supposedly is the boss of the company, finally receives Mr. Hamilton in the office. The way they stage it, the way they direct the actor by presenting what the proposal, the sales pitch of the company is to Mr. Hamilton by saying, well, this is the amount of money. They don't right ahead say what it is, what they are selling. It's the money first. And it's kind of, we as the audience, through the viewpoint of Mr. Hamilton, are becoming kind of, what's the word, shocked by this, and first the cost, wow, for what, then plastic surgery altering your face, and then finally the purpose. But all of this while he's being given chicken. And the guy goes around the corner and sits down, and he becomes, side to side with him, all this beautiful chicken butter, great. I'm like, what? And so he kind of becomes, instead of becoming like a distant salesman, he kind of becomes a pal in a canteen, which is weird. But he really eases in on that which you were saying, Justin, which is kind of this ease in the proximity, the respectability that the companies manages to get at him despite the whole weirdness of it all. And actually, one question I have on a sideway, that now that we're discussing kind of the structure of the film, I mean, don't you feel that this film, the structure of it, and this kind of happens with other films, but I really feel that this film has this sort of plot that I've seen over and over and over. It kind of lives in the collective consciousness of cinema, where you have like an unhappy family man who is bored, and then he needs a strange friend from his past life comes in, and hey, there's this company, here's a card, and he goes to the company is in the back of the store, or below deck, or in the basement. He goes there, then they do something to promise him like this huge surreal path to an alternate reality where he's going to finally live his happiest dreams. But he realizes that at the cost of what his family, so he needs to get back. And there are variations of that in I was constantly thinking other movies. I couldn't quite pick, in other comparisons, but I kind of remember, Eyes Wide Shut, with the friend that comes along and brings Tom Cruise to this kind of orgy kind of thing. There was this horrible film with Ryan Reynolds called Selfless from Tarsem Singh in 2015. That is basically, it's very similar in the sense that it's Ben Kingsley, but he's a rich, kind of wealthy guy up in his tower, and he decides to change life, and he becomes Ryan Reynolds, of course. Then he went on to make Deadpool movies with Ben Kingsley. But that's actually Ben Kingsley. But I don't know. I mean, what do you think? Do any movies of the genre pop up in your head that really fit this?
Not quite exactly it, but I think the thing of like you go into this other world which has all the promise of happiness, but you really realize you got to go home, is Wizard of Oz. I think that's like the text of,
which is like what Eyes Wide Shut draws so heavily.
Yeah,
on,
exactly.
too, with what's on the other side of the rainbow.
Exactly, and it turns out it's
still you, still just you, but trapped.
But and I think there is that feeling of like, I think it's important to note that it's a deep desire that we have when we're unsatisfied that it must be better somewhere else. It must be that over the rainbow in this other, if only I could just do this, everything would be better. And of course that's never the case, but it is a natural human impulse. And I think it's being borne out in all this art that is cautionary in a way.
Yeah.
But then the question then I'm interested in is like, okay, if it's not that other thing, then what is it? It is probably like wherever you go, there you are kind of thing. Like it's you have to like deal with yourself. Ultimately, that's the issue. But anyway, I do think it's interesting. Maybe this just to speak to your point, Thomas, about earlier. It's like dealing with yourself. That's hard. I'd rather just go somewhere else and it would be better. If I just go on vacation, won't everything be better?
Yeah. Regret is exquisitely painful, I think, to us humans.
Yeah.
I mean, my 5-year-old son expressed a need for do-overs the other day. Like he was like, I wish I could just go back in time and do it differently. And I was like, what do you mean? Like he's 5, do what differently? And he's like,
yeah.
And but what I was trying to get at with him was just that like, he doesn't like living in hard feelings and things that didn't go quite right, as none of us do. And he's like, I wish he cried before going to school. And he's like, I wish I could go back and not cry before I went to school. And I was like, it's all life, man, like the good and the bad. But I think, us as people, it's really painful to wonder about how you could have done things differently.
You know, Nietzsche is interested in this idea, and this is the whole notion of eternal recurrence. And Nietzsche's basically the idea there is that if you think that you could have done something differently, that's actually a misunderstanding. I mean, he has a deterministic mindset, which is that like if you had gone back and chosen otherwise, it wouldn't have been you. And I think what's interesting about that is the idea that all of the things that have happened, even the good and the bad, all the stuff that you might regret and all that, it comprises who you are now. And so you would actually be losing yourself if you were to go back and change those things to make for a better thing, for a better life, as you would imagine it. But in fact, actually, you would be losing aspects of yourself. And that's reflected in this film because, okay, I need to change. And if I could change my identity, I'll be happier. But in fact, what he loses himself. And then I think it's interesting, he goes back to his prior life to sort of see if maybe he can find something there that was missing, that like if he could just catch that, maybe then he'll be happy again. And he doesn't find it there.
Right.
But I think what's interesting is that potentially what he's lost is something worse than just, like not gaining the happy life. He's actually in the process of doing this identity transformation, lost who he was. And now he's completely adrift. So he effectively, you might think, after the end of the first surgery, is dead. Like he's just died. He's not reborn. I think it's interesting that they call it reborns. That's like a really, I don't know, creepy, but also like evocative idea. But like, he's just dead. And there's nothing, you might think there's nothing further for him.
Even though and I mean, I sometimes express my own feelings of wanting to go back and do things again, but like with my old brain. You know what I mean? Like what they're offering is like you get new face, you get new setup, but all the mistakes you've made in the past. So you don't have to do it again. You can do it differently. But like there's a couple of things. One is that we are who we are and we make the mistakes and the choices that we make, maybe, but also that like we're not set up in a society to really do anything differently, perhaps.
Yeah.
So it's a double whammy. But I do often I so often wish I could go back and go back knowing what I know now. But I think this movie's telling me that that's bullshit.
I actually think this is maybe what the meaning of the title is. I was thinking about the title because I was like seconds. I was like, usually
it's true. It's
like having seconds, like with food.
Seconds, exactly. That's what I think it is. It's got to be that it's second chances. It's like going back again rather than like time. It's got nothing to do with time, I think, because the time isn't really an issue in this film, but it's like second chances. It's like going back, as you said.
And it's interesting you say that it's kind of a trait of people, and you would lose something else because I mean, I would imagine like an overthinker as a trait, you would just be more prone to thinking about things that they could have done. So it's just who you are. It's just a matter of personality.
Yeah. If we're not trapped in our physical bodies, we're still trapped in our minds.
Yeah, we're trapped in our minds. You would, I do deal with anxiety, in some forms, and I find, sometimes I wish I wasn't anxious about these things. But on the other hand, that is who I am. I'm a person who has to deal with anxiety and has to deal with a kind of, panic periodically, and that's just my orientation in the world, and it's like structured everything about myself. If I lacked that, I don't know if I would even know myself. I would be someone completely different, and it would be maybe even feel fake. And I think that's part of what I think makes people worried and cautious about miracle cure type drugs like that could just remove the just make you happy, like the Soma in Brave New World. It's like the worry is like, oh, but that's inauthentic. A lot like this character of Arthur's now, his new life is inauthentic because it's not him. He lacks the problems and that he was dealing with, and those problems were, and maybe even the quest for meaning was part of who he was, even though he was unhappy.
And to me, the second half of the film, although it's a film that is rich with themes and ideas, I also feel at the same time that we have this beautiful first act, but I also feel there's something lacking in the second act. I would have liked to see more of his life as Tony fleshed out and what goes wrong. I think it's beautiful that they chose, narratively speaking, to go somewhere that I was not expecting. At first, I thought they were going to go there, and the first hint of that was when you have Tony Wilson, Rock Hudson, landing on the airport, and you have this guy who suddenly recognizes him. So I thought, oh, okay, so that's going to be the problem. You know, people of the past, of Wilson's past, this
Right. Like,
cadaver,
whose
because he was
face
a real
does he
person.
have?
Yeah.
That's
But
where
the
I was
people
going
from Wilson's
sci-fi wise.
part,
I was like, is he wearing somebody's face? Like, and he's recognizable? Is another, that's
right.
yeah.
I thought it was going to go there, that people from Wilson's past were trying to, you know, come on in. But the film goes this way where it all goes down because, like you said, Justin, plants, you know, there are already people from the company or newborns, products of the company, there in his lab. That's how they control, they put everyone together in this sort of hub. But at the same time, I think they missed an opportunity, and Frankenheimer kind of said this himself, that I think we missed an opportunity with the second act of delving further. Because if they are pushing him down in that iconic shot of, you know, his point of view shot of all these faces look at him in bed, and there's something weird about a bunch of guys putting you in bed, you know, just pressing down on you and having this face in bed. You know, it's an intimate space, and you have these whole people around you. It's very uncomfortable. But the fact is, they are trying to press him down and keep his mouth shut. But from whom? Like, if there were other agents in the room, people who are not newborns, then that would be more interesting. I think there was a missed opportunity to kind of see him blending in with the natural world, so to speak, interacting, engaging with, oh, what is cool about this life, what isn't cool about this life. I think that it's a bit rushed. That's what I feel.
I like that. So the idea that he's got someone else's face is interesting. So on IMDb, I just scrolled through the IMDb trivia, and like somebody put that. I mean, again, who knows? But it's an interesting read. They think what that shows is that they've been recycling this identity. So they've just been giving different people the Tony Wilson identity.
Right.
And so it's just so, and that actually speaks again to this idea of like, you know, the sort of American capitalist system, whatever, it like
it's modular.
It's modular. Like
which prototype do you want to fit in?
We're cogs in this machine, and we're all substitutable. So you're not really special, because if you die, I could just put someone else right there and it'll do your job just as well. So
right, it's like they've got a menu, then you can pick like from 5 identities.
Rock.
Right. Yeah. You can be Tony Wilson, the painter, or you can be, and like but there's only a few of them, you know, that listen, he's that plastic surgeon, he's doing a lot of work, you know.
He's good at this job.
He's just got to save time. He can, you know, he's just going to make Rock Hudson again and again. Because like, why mess with perfection?
He does keep saying like, you were my best work. Maybe from that point of view, maybe he means like that was the most perfect Rock Hudson face that I made.
Yeah, that was the most Rock Hudson I've ever accomplished. Do you think like Rock Hudson as a casting choice was at all like conscious or autobiographical?
Tell us more about this.
I mean, Rock Hudson was famously gay in Hollywood in the 50s and 60s, but never like publicly so, kind of not allowed to be publicly so, but like lived a private life. And I did wonder too about like those scenes with him and his wife and never able to connect, if that, you know, if like Rock Hudson was sort of bringing that, you know, to the role and the ways that he has to play act. I mean, he's like the most awesome. He's famous for being gay in Hollywood and also for doing all the rom-coms, heterosexual rom-coms, of course.
I mean, that's what's most surprising, is that I remember him from Pillow Talk with Doris Day and All Written in the Wind and All That Heaven Allows.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's the one. But there's a Written in the Wind, just that. And it's such a mixed both. It's so far-fetched from this that is quite a surprise. He was actually drunk at the cocktail party. That's him legitimately drunk.
Really?
I found out. Yeah.
He's a method
so
actor.
I don't know.
I didn't know.
I don't know what kind of control is there, but it's quite interesting to see that. And that to the very end, he kept up this straight persona. You know, he even married his secretary, I think. So it's quite sad.
Right, or I think it was his like his agent secretary or his publicist secretary or something. And so there was there's a lot of theories about the like the short-lived marriage that he had, but like some people just thought it was sort of a distraction because the confidential magazine said he, you know, outed him, and they were kind of like maybe doing some PR work there. I don't know. I mean, obviously, who's to say about these things? But I did wonder if like that sort of like his view into how to live a palatable American life and what you can, you know, and your public facing persona versus your private interior life was something that was consciously chosen, you know, so that he brought to the role, but also maybe consciously chosen casting.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, I mean, if the director meant it or not, I don't know. But to him as an actor, it definitely was something that he was probably feeling, because, I mean, having these people force an identity, which is Tony Wilson, on you, and especially in the moment where he wants to go back to being, or wants to have another choice, wants to be something else, and they keep forcing you to be what you're not. I think that definitely informed this performance, in bringing those emotions out. I probably helped. And even, I mean, even from a casting point of view, I think they probably knew that it was a suggestive thing. Like, it suggested something about this character, and knowing about Rock Hudson, a open secret, it probably, with the public also, it lended itself well, from a casting perspective.
The wide angle, close up wide angle stuff was very striking to me visually.
Yes,
And like, it just seemed like, the other person who apparently loves this movie, I don't know if Gilliam does, but feels like it's like a Gilliam classic. But the other person who apparently loves this movie is Gaspar Noé.
Oh.
And he apparently, it was his first, when he went in the Criterion closet, it was his first pick. And he's claimed that he wants to remake it at some point. So,
oh wow,
but it really feels like
that.
It feels like
that hippie scene is going to be very different.
I know, it's going to be very unpleasant.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe you could just make the whole film is the hippie scene. I think it could make
exactly.
Yeah, it's everybody just putting LSD in their eyeballs, and then like,
oh my god.
What I think is interesting is it does, when you think about this film in the context of Noé's career, you're like, oh yeah, climax.
What's the one that's from like the first person perspective for much of it, the drug one where
that's climax.
Thank you. Sorry.
And then the other, and then the one that he did, the most recent one, which I now forgot, which I loved, with the stars
Dario Argento.
Yeah, Dario Argento. Yeah, like about aging and sort of like the lack of meaning in your life as you age, and you're, and looking back on your life and regret and all that stuff. And I mean, I do feel like there are threads of this kind of, maybe not irreversible, but
never work in irreversible though. There's a lot of
for sure,
especially the beginning of it.
That's true.
Yeah.
I do kind of like, I was like, oh yeah, like no, like this does seem to be an informative film for him.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to give a remake a hard pass though, because
Laura's not a big fan of Noé, but I love
not take any more Noé. Like I can't. Like I just.
I mean, he's peculiar. He's different. I think what was it? I think I read this like an article which was 10 worst things or 10 weird things that Gaspar Noé did. One of them, on one of the sets, he went to a bar. I don't know if it was a gay bar or something. He went there just to kind of, he wanted to not feel like he was an outsider. I don't know which of his films it was, but in order to make himself feel he was part of the kind of this fringe world. I don't know if it was, I think it was a gay bar.
Maybe the club in the beginning
of
probably
irreversible.
Like the BDSM club.
Maybe.
Yeah.
He went there and masturbated himself, the director there, and I'm like, wow.
Yeah, okay. That all checks out.
I scratched that tip for my book. Not having that one. I don't want it. Thank you.
No plans to do that as research.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, when we started climax and the blinking was happening with the breathing, I was like, Justin, is this going to go on for the whole movie? Because I can't deal with it.
No, that was not climax. That was Enter the Void.
Enter the
Void is the first person one.
I really hated that one.
Yeah, but then climax is, climax has a lot of flashy.
Yeah. No. I was thinking climax. I was thinking about the blinking and the breathing from the first person perspective camera work, where I was like, this is
well, then the person eventually dies, so they become a spirit.
Yeah,
no blinking then.
Fine, but that's what I was concerned with. I was like, I don't want it to blink for an hour and 20.
Right.
I mean, I haven't watched many Noé films. It's just not. I don't think I'm gonna like them, honestly. We did listen to him, like we went to a master class.
Q&A. It's true.
Yeah, exactly. He was surprisingly nice, like speaking surprisingly not very arrogant as I thought he would be. He had that vibe of a very,
he has that weird aura to him,
European type of guy. But he was,
as much as I don't always enjoy his films, I think a Q&A would be fascinating with that guy.
It was very interesting.
Yeah,
he's got a real perspective. I feel like him and Lars von Trier and the kind of these guys that are like, sort of more interesting parts of the New Extremity kind of era, and like provocateurs are actually, they're much deeper and more interesting, and it just happens to be that they're engaged in extremely violent and upsetting subject matter. But I kind of feel like it's not like they're just doing that stuff just to like piss off the audience or get a rise out of people, but they're seriously engaging with what that means about us, that that we do have to confront sort of rape, or we do have to confront um corporal punishment or
Yeah,
whatever, and
or
like
on-screen blinking.
On screen blinking.
Laura will never forgive.
Oh my God.
Never
There needs to
forgive.
be a warning for Laura saying this might have on-screen blinking on the next films of his.
That is on my content warnings. Thank you for
Exactly. That's all for today, folks. If you'd like to reach out and suggest a film for next episode, you can find us on the podcast official Instagram and website pages. Feel free to subscribe, share this episode, or simply give us a like. That's how our podcast can grow ever more groovy. And if you're on YouTube and want to see more videos like this, check out this next video right here. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.